The snow fell thick and heavy across Lake Placid, New York, on December 23, 1985, blanketing the small resort town in a pristine white silence that would soon be shattered by tragedy. 8-year-old Michael Chen had been looking forward to this family vacation for months, his excitement evident in the way he pressed his nose against the frosted windows of their rental cabin, watching the snowflakes dance in the amber glow of the street lamps that lined Mirror Lake Drive. The Chen family had driven up from Brooklyn for their annual Christmas getaway, a tradition that had begun 3 years earlier when Michael's father, David, had finally saved enough money from his job at the Atlantic Shipping Company to afford a week in the Adirondack Mountains. David worked long hours loading cargo containers at the Brooklyn docks, his calloused hands and weathered face telling the story of a man who understood the value of hard work. Susan, Michael's mother, worked part-time at a local elementary school as a teaching assistant, her gentle nature and infinite patience making her beloved by both students and faculty. This vacation represented more than just a holiday for the Chen family. It was David's promise fulfilled, a dream he had nurtured since his own childhood spent in cramped tenements where winter vacations were luxuries reserved for other families. He remembered pressing his face against similar windows, watching other children board buses bound for places he could only imagine. Now, at 32 with his own family, he was determined to give Michael experiences he himself had never had. Before we continue with Michael's story, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We share these mysterious cases every week, and your support means everything to us. Also, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from around the world. We love connecting with viewers everywhere. Michael's anticipation had been building for weeks. He had carefully packed his favorite winter clothes, including the red knit hat his paternal grandmother Michael Chen had made for him the previous winter. The hat bore a small embroidered snowflake pattern that sparkled when it caught the light, and Michael believed it brought him luck in everything from math tests to playground games. Popo had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1940s and lived with the family in their small Brooklyn apartment, filling their home with the aroma of traditional dishes and stories of winters in the mountains of her homeland. The Lake Placid resort sat nestled among towering pine trees on the shores of Mirror Lake, its rustic charm enhanced by strings of Christmas lights that reflected off the snow-covered grounds. Built in the 1920s as a luxury retreat for wealthy New Yorkers, the resort had evolved over the decades into a family-friendly destination that attracted middle-class families like the Chens seeking affordable winter adventures. The main lodge, constructed from massive logs and local stone, housed a restaurant, gift shop, and guest services, while individual cabins dotted the property like scenes from a Christmas card. Their cabin, number 17, featured a stone fireplace, knotty pine walls, and 2 small bedrooms that smelled faintly of wood smoke and decades of family memories. Michael claimed the smaller bedroom for himself, delighting in the independence of his own space and the view it offered of the ice-covered lake. He spent his first evening arranging his belongings with the meticulous care of a child who understood this vacation was special, laying out his clothes for the next day and positioning his beloved stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, on the pillow where he could watch over the winter wonderland outside. That first night, as wind whistled through the pine trees and snow continued to accumulate on the windowsills, Michael fell asleep, listening to his parents talking quietly in the main room. Their voices carried the contentment of adults who had worked hard for this moment of peace, planning activities for the coming days and expressing gratitude for the opportunity to create memories together. David's voice held particular satisfaction as he described the skating rink he had noticed near the main lodge, remembering his own childhood dreams of gliding across ice like the hockey players he had watched on television. Susan worried about the cold, as mothers do, checking and rechecking the weather forecast and ensuring they had packed enough warm clothes for every possible scenario. She had grown up in a household where preparation was paramount, her own mother having survived the hardships of the Great Depression by planning for every contingency. This attention to detail extended to every aspect of their family life, from Michael's lunchboxes packed with extra snacks to the first aid kit she carried everywhere they went. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with temperatures hovering around 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky stretched endlessly blue above the snow-covered mountains, promising the kind of perfect winter day that exists mainly in memories and postcards. Michael woke before his parents. His internal clock adjusted to the excitement that had been building for weeks. He dressed quietly in the thermal underwear Susan had insisted upon, then his favorite jeans and the thick wool sweater Popo had knitted with cable patterns that resembled tiny snowflakes. When David and Susan finally emerged from their bedroom, they found Michael sitting at the small kitchen table, fully dressed and eating cereal while staring out the window at the winter paradise awaiting them. His enthusiasm was infectious, bubbling over in a stream of questions about when they could go skating, whether they would see any deer, and if the snow was deep enough for building a fort. Susan bundled him in additional layers before they left the cabin, the thermal underwear topped with his wool sweater, then his heavy winter coat, waterproof snow pants, thick mittens, and finally the red knit hat that completed his armor against the Adirondack cold. The walk to the main lodge took them along a shoveled path that wound between towering pine trees whose branches hung heavy with snow. Other guests were emerging from their cabins, creating a parade of colorfully dressed families making their way toward breakfast and the day's adventures. Michael walked between his parents, occasionally breaking away to kick at snowdrifts or examine the icicles hanging from cabin eaves like nature's chandeliers. The main lodge bustled with activity as families gathered for breakfast in the restaurant that overlooked Mirror Lake. The dining room featured massive windows that framed the winter landscape like living paintings, and Michael chose a table where he could watch cross-country skiers gliding across the frozen lake surface. The breakfast menu offered hearty fare designed to fuel winter adventures. Thick pancakes with real maple syrup, eggs and bacon, and hot chocolate topped with whipped cream that left foam mustaches on children's faces. After breakfast, they explored the resort's winter offerings. The ice rink occupied a section of Mirror Lake that had been cleared and maintained specifically for skating, its surface polished to a mirror finish that reflected the surrounding mountains. A warming hut nearby offered skate rentals and hot beverages for cold skaters, tended by a cheerful teenager named Jenny, who had grown up in Lake Placid and considered winter sports as natural as walking. David rented skates for all three of them, helping Michael lace up the stiff boots while explaining the basics of balance and movement on ice. Michael's first attempts were wobbly and uncertain, his arms windmilling as he struggled to maintain equilibrium on the slippery surface. But his determination impressed the other skaters, who offered encouragement and tips as he gradually found his footing. Susan proved surprisingly graceful on skates, a skill she had developed during childhood winters in upstate New York before her family moved to the city. She glided beside Michael, one hand ready to steady him while the other held her camera to capture moments she knew would become treasured family memories. David, despite his size and usual grace, struggled more than his son, his work boots and dock worker coordination not translating well to the ice. His falls prompted laughter from Michael, who delighted in seeing his strong father reduced to the same wobbly uncertainty he himself experienced. They spent the morning on the ice, with Michael's confidence growing with each successful glide across the rink's surface. His laughter echoed across the lake as he attempted increasingly ambitious moves, always falling but always getting back up with the resilience that characterized his approach to every challenge. Other children on the ice began including him in impromptu games of tag and follow the leader. And soon Michael was part of a group of young skaters racing around the rink with the fearlessness that belongs only to childhood. Around noon, they returned to the warming hut for hot chocolate and rest. Michael sat beside the wood-burning stove, his cheeks flushed pink from the cold and exercise, regaling anyone who would listen with stories of his morning adventures. An elderly couple from Vermont, the Williamsons, listened with amused smiles as he described his ambitious plans to become an Olympic figure skater by the following Christmas. His earnest conviction that this goal was entirely achievable charmed the other guests, who recognized the beautiful innocence of childhood dreams, not yet tempered by reality's limitations. The Williamsons had been coming to Lake Placid for 15 years, and they shared stories of their own grandchildren's first experiences on ice. Mrs. Williamson, a retired teacher, recognized in Michael the special spark of a child who approached life with unbridled enthusiasm and curiosity. She and Susan struck up a conversation about raising children in the city versus the country, while Mr. Williamson and David discussed the differences between Brooklyn dock work and Vermont farming. After lunch at the main lodge, David suggested they try the sledding hill behind the building. Michael's eyes lit up at this proposal, having noticed other families enjoying the slope during their morning activities. The resort maintained several wooden toboggans for guest use, traditional sleds that had been serving families for decades. These weren't the plastic sleds Michael was accustomed to in Brooklyn's small parks, but substantial wooden constructions that could carry adults and children together down the gentle slope. The sledding area was located on a hill that rose approximately 50 yards behind the main lodge, offering a perfect combination of excitement and safety for families with young children. The slope had been carefully groomed by resort staff, creating a smooth track through the snow that ended in a flat area where hay bales had been strategically placed to slow down runaway sleds. Pine trees lined both sides of the hill, their snow-laden branches creating a natural corridor that made the descent feel like traveling through a winter tunnel. Several other families were already enjoying the afternoon sledding, their laughter and shouts creating a festive atmosphere that drew more guests to the activity. Parents pulled children back up the hill on toboggans, creating a steady stream of winter-clad figures trudging through the deep snow. The scene resembled a Norman Rockwell painting come to life, complete with rosy-cheeked children and parents whose expressions mixed watchful concern with genuine enjoyment of their children's pleasure. Michael insisted on trying a solo run, despite Susan's gentle protests about safety. At 8 years old, he had reached the age where independence became increasingly important, where proving his capabilities to himself and others drove many of his decisions. David examined the slope carefully, noting its gentle grade and the safety measures in place, before agreeing that Michael could attempt the run by himself while they positioned themselves at the bottom to provide assistance if needed. They watched as their son climbed to the top of the hill, dragging one of the smaller toboggans behind him with determination that made other parents smile with recognition. The wooden sled cut a furrow through the snow as Michael pulled it up the slope, stopping occasionally to catch his breath in the thin mountain air. His red knit hat stood out brilliantly against the white snow and dark pine trees, making him easy to track as he made his way to the summit. At the crest of the hill, Michael turned and waved enthusiastically at his parents below, his mitten-covered hand cutting through the crisp air in a gesture of triumph and anticipation. Susan waved back, her camera ready to capture the moment, while David positioned himself at the bottom of the slope with his arms outstretched, ready to catch his son if the sled proved too fast or difficult to control. Other parents paused their own activities to watch the small boy prepare for his descent, recognizing the universal moment when a child takes on a new challenge. Michael positioned the toboggan carefully at the edge of the slope, just as resort staff had demonstrated earlier. He sat down on the wooden seat, gripped the rope handles with both hands, and used his feet to push off from the packed snow at the hill's crest. The sled began to move slowly at first, carving a clean path through the fresh powder as gravity took hold and began pulling boy and toboggan down the gentle incline. Halfway down the hill, Michael's red hat flew off, caught by a gust of wind that sent it tumbling into the snow beside the makeshift sledding track. The hat landed upright in a small drift, its snowflake pattern still visible against the white background, looking for all the world like it had been carefully placed there rather than lost during an exuberant sledding run. David laughed and called out, "Don't forget your hat, buddy," as Michael reached the bottom of the hill safely, his face glowing with triumph and the exhilaration that comes from successfully completing a challenge. The toboggan slid to a gentle stop against the hay bales, and Michael immediately jumped off, already planning his next run and chattering excitedly about how he wanted to try going backwards or maybe even lying down on his stomach for the next descent. Susan walked up the hill to retrieve the fallen red hat, her boots crunching through the snow as she climbed the slope, where other families had worn a rough path. She found the knit cap half buried in a drift, brushed the snow off carefully, and was about to head back down when she noticed Michael had already started climbing the hill again, this time without carrying a toboggan behind him. The second part of our story begins with that moment of casual observation that would soon transform into desperate concern. Susan called out to her son, "Where's your sled, honey?" But Michael didn't seem to hear her question. He continued walking up the slope, his small figure moving steadily through the deep snow with the determined gait of a child on a mission. Susan assumed he was planning to retrieve another toboggan from the collection kept at the top of the hill for guest use, a reasonable explanation that required no immediate concern. David was engaged in conversation with another father about the best local restaurants when Susan returned with the recovered hat. Tom Bradley, a fellow New Yorker from Manhattan, had been sharing recommendations for dinner spots in town while his own children took turns on the sleds. The conversation had drifted to comparisons between city and mountain living, the kind of casual exchange that develops naturally between parents watching their children play. "Where did Michael go?" Susan asked, scanning the sledding area for her son's distinctive red coat and dark hair. The hill appeared busy with other families, but she couldn't immediately spot Michael among the children climbing up and sliding down the slope. David looked up from his conversation with Tom Bradley, his eyes automatically searching for his son among the colorful collection of winter-clad children. "He was just here a minute ago," David replied, his voice carrying no concern yet. "Maybe he went to get another sled from the top." They both looked toward the crest of the hill, where resort staff maintained a collection of toboggans for guests, but Michael's red coat wasn't visible among the families gathered there. Susan felt the first flutter of unease, the maternal instinct that alerts mothers to potential problems before logic has time to assess the situation. "Michael!" Susan called, her voice carrying clearly across the winter air. Several other parents looked up at the sound, recognizing the slightly urgent tone that parents use when temporarily losing sight of their children. But no answering call came back, and no small figure in a red coat appeared to wave from the hilltop or emerge from behind the pine trees that lined the slope. David excused himself from his conversation and joined Susan in calling their son's name. Their voices echoed off the surrounding mountains, creating a chorus of "Michael" that grew more urgent with each repetition. Other families in the sledding area began to take notice, the way communities of parents instinctively respond when one of their own faces potential trouble. Jenny Patterson, the teenager who managed the equipment rental and had been monitoring the sledding hill, approached the Chen parents with growing concern. A lifelong Lake Placid resident who had worked at the resort for 2 winter seasons, Jenny knew that children occasionally wandered off to explore other parts of the property. But something about the intensity of the parents' calls suggested this might be more serious. "When did you last see him?" Jenny asked, her voice professional but kind. At 17, she had been trained to handle various guest emergencies, from minor injuries to lost belongings, but missing children required immediate escalation to resort management. "Maybe 10 minutes ago," David replied, his engineer's mind automatically calculating the time that had passed since Michael's successful sled run. "He came down the hill, then started walking back up. We thought he was getting another sled." Jenny's expression grew more serious as she considered the timeline and the layout of the resort property. 10 minutes was long enough for an 8-year-old to wander considerable distances, especially a curious child exploring new territory. She immediately radioed Tom Bradley, the resort manager, while continuing to question the Chen parents about Michael's appearance and behavior. "He's wearing a red winter coat and dark blue snow pants," Susan provided, her voice beginning to carry the edge of real panic. "He's 8 years old, about 4 feet tall, with straight black hair. He was excited about everything. He wouldn't just wander off without telling us." The resort manager, Tom Bradley, not to be confused with the guest David had been talking with, arrived within minutes of Jenny's radio call. A man in his 50s with 30 years of hospitality experience in the Adirondack Mountains. Bradley had dealt with lost guests before, usually tourists who had wandered too far on hiking trails or skiers who had taken wrong turns on mountain paths. But a missing child in winter conditions was a different matter entirely, requiring immediate and coordinated action. Bradley's first step was to organize the resort staff into search teams, each assigned to specific areas of the property. Maintenance workers checked all buildings, including storage areas and utility rooms, where curious children might explore. Housekeeping staff searched guest cabins and common areas, while restaurant personnel examined the lodge and dining facilities. The systematic approach reflected Bradley's experience with emergency situations and his understanding that time was critical in winter conditions. Meanwhile, David and Susan provided detailed information about Michael's clothing, personality, and interests to help searchers understand where he might go. Michael was drawn to animals and had expressed interest in seeing deer or other wildlife during their vacation. He was also fascinated by mechanical things and might investigate snowplows or other resort equipment. This information helped searchers prioritize certain areas while maintaining comprehensive coverage of the property. The local sheriff's department was notified within 30 minutes of Michael's disappearance being confirmed. Deputy Maria Santos, a mother of 2 herself and a 10-year veteran of the force, understood the urgency of finding a missing child before nightfall in sub-zero temperatures. She immediately dispatched additional officers and began coordinating with state police for specialized resources, including tracking dogs and helicopter support if needed. As the search expanded beyond the immediate sledding area, something began to emerge that would puzzle investigators for years to come. Michael's footprints from his walk up the sledding hill were clearly visible in the snow, small boot prints that led from the bottom of the slope toward the tree line, where the maintained resort property met the wild Adirondack forest. But these weren't ordinary tracks disappearing into winter conditions. Unlike every other footprint in the sledding area, which had begun to fill in with blowing snow or develop the softened edges that come from changing temperatures, Michael's prints remained perfectly preserved. Each impression showed clear detail of his boot tread, as crisp and defined as if they had been made moments before, despite the fact that other children had been playing in the same area and new snow had fallen intermittently throughout the afternoon. Resort guests began volunteering to help with the search, transforming the festive vacation atmosphere into a somber community effort. Families who had been enjoying their holiday activities found themselves combing through pine forests and checking remote areas of the property. The Williamsons, the elderly Vermont couple who had befriended Michael during lunch, joined the search despite their age, their familiarity with mountain terrain making them valuable volunteers. As afternoon faded toward evening, bringing the early winter darkness that characterizes December in the mountains, the search took on increased urgency. Temperatures were dropping rapidly, and even a well-dressed child couldn't survive indefinitely in the Adirondack winter. Emergency lighting was brought in to illuminate the search areas, creating a surreal scene of powerful beams cutting through the pine forests around Lake Placid. The state police tracking dogs arrived just after sunset, German shepherds trained specifically for wilderness search and rescue operations. The handlers, experienced in mountain rescues, noted immediately the unusual clarity of Michael's scent trail. Most tracks in winter conditions became difficult to follow, as wind and temperature changes dispersed scent molecules. But Michael's trail remained strong and clear, as if recently made. The dogs followed the scent path up the sledding hill and into the pine forest, their handlers struggling to keep pace through the deep snow. For approximately 200 yards, the trail remained consistent, leading through the trees in a relatively straight line away from the resort buildings. But then, at the base of a large oak tree that stood slightly apart from the surrounding pines, the trail simply ended. The search teams examined the area carefully with flashlights and portable floodlights. There were no signs of struggle, no indication that Michael had climbed the tree, no footprints leading away in any direction. The dogs circled the oak tree repeatedly, whining with confusion as they lost all trace of the scent they had been following with confidence moments before. Dr. James Morrison, a forensic expert from the state police, was called in to examine the scene. Morrison specialized in tracking evidence and had worked on dozens of missing person cases throughout the Adirondacks. He had seen tracks obscured by weather, destroyed by animal activity, or confused by multiple human passages, but he had never encountered anything quite like Michael Chen's footprints. "It's almost as if the snow is protecting these specific tracks," Morrison told Deputy Santos as they examined the preserved impressions by flashlight. "Every other print in this area shows normal deterioration from wind and temperature changes, but these remain as clear as when they were first made." The search continued through the night, with volunteers taking shifts to maintain body heat and energy levels. Powerful generator-driven floodlights illuminated the forest around the resort, creating a staging area where searchers could warm themselves with hot coffee and coordinate their efforts. Susan and David Chen remained at the command post, refusing offers to rest in their cabin while their son remained missing in the winter wilderness. As dawn broke over Mirror Lake, helicopter support arrived from the State Police Aviation Unit. The helicopters carried thermal imaging equipment capable of detecting body heat from considerable altitudes, technology that had proven successful in previous mountain rescues. For hours, the aircraft crisscrossed the wilderness surrounding Lake Placid, their thermal cameras searching for any sign of human presence in the vast expanse of snow-covered forest. But the helicopters found nothing. No heat signature, no movement, no indication that an 8-year-old boy was surviving somewhere in the winter landscape. The pilots expanded their search pattern to include neighboring valleys and mountain ridges, covering dozens of square miles of wilderness that stretched far beyond what a child could reasonably traverse on foot. Ground teams continued their systematic search of the area around the oak tree where Michael's tracks ended. They examined every tree for signs of climbing, every depression in the snow for indication that a child might have fallen or taken shelter. The preserved footprints remained their only concrete clue, leading investigators back repeatedly to stare at the impossibly clear impressions that seemed to mock their efforts to understand what had happened. Local residents were questioned about strangers in the area, unusual vehicles, or any suspicious activity in the days leading up to Michael's disappearance. Lake Placid was a close-knit community where newcomers were readily noticed, especially during the busy Christmas season when tourism brought predictable crowds but few complete strangers. But no one reported anything out of the ordinary during the week of December 23, 1985. The Chen family's background was thoroughly investigated as well, a standard procedure that David and Susan understood but found deeply painful. Detectives examined their finances, looking for signs of kidnapping motivation, reviewed their social connections for potential threats, and investigated their family history for any indication of domestic problems that might explain Michael's disappearance. They found nothing but a hard-working middle-class family devoted to their only child. As the second day of searching concluded without success, media attention began to focus on the case. Local television stations reported on the missing boy and the unusual circumstances surrounding his disappearance, particularly the mysteriously preserved footprints that continued to baffle investigators. The story struck a nerve with parents throughout the region, who recognized their own fears reflected in the Chen family's nightmare. The preserved tracks became both a source of hope and a torment for Michael's parents. Susan visited the site multiple times each day, sometimes standing for hours in the bitter cold, staring at her son's final known steps. The footprints represented the last physical evidence of Michael's presence, proof that he had walked this path but no indication of where he had gone afterward. David threw himself into the search with the determination of a man who refused to accept failure. He organized volunteer groups, coordinated with law enforcement, and personally explored every trail and logging road within miles of the resort. His engineering background helped him think systematically about search patterns and probability, but even his methodical approach yielded no results. The third part of our story takes us deeper into the investigation that would span decades, driven by the inexplicable nature of Michael's disappearance and the haunting presence of those preserved footprints that refused to fade with time. As winter deepened around Lake Placid, the active search began to scale back from emergency response to long-term investigation, a transition that felt like abandoning hope, even though everyone involved knew it was necessary. Detective Robert Flynn arrived from Albany on the fourth day, bringing with him 25 years of experience investigating missing children cases. Flynn had seen families destroyed by uncertainty and communities torn apart by unsolved disappearances, but he had also witnessed the power of persistent investigation and the importance of never closing a case until answers were found. His reputation for thoroughness and his gentle manner with families in crisis made him the state police's first choice for high-profile missing person cases. Flynn's initial assessment of the scene confirmed what local investigators had already documented, but his experience allowed him to notice details others might miss. The oak tree where Michael's tracks ended showed no signs of recent disturbance, no broken branches, no scuff marks on the bark, no indication that a child had attempted to climb it. The surrounding snow was undisturbed except for the searchers' own footprints, creating a perimeter of trampled earth around the mysteriously preserved tracks. What troubled Flynn most was the behavior of the tracking dogs. In his experience, scent trails didn't simply vanish without explanation. Dogs might lose a trail due to water crossings, strong winds, or contamination from other scents, but they typically showed signs of confusion or continued searching in expanding circles. The German shepherds brought to track Michael had simply stopped at the oak tree and refused to continue, as if the scent they had been following had literally evaporated. The preserved footprints defied every natural explanation Flynn could conceive. Snow was a temporary medium that changed constantly due to temperature fluctuations, wind patterns, and precipitation. Even under ideal conditions, footprints in snow showed signs of aging within hours, edges softening, details blurring, depth changing as the snow settled or sublimated. Yet Michael's tracks remained as sharp and detailed as fresh impressions, immune to the natural processes that affected every other mark in the snow. Dr. James Morrison returned with specialized equipment to document and analyze the phenomenon. High-resolution photography captured every detail of the preserved prints, while temperature sensors and meteorological instruments recorded environmental conditions around the site. Soil samples were taken from beneath the snow to test for unusual chemical compositions or temperature variations that might explain the preservation effect. Laboratory analysis revealed nothing extraordinary about the soil composition or temperature readings. The ground beneath Michael's footprints showed the same characteristics as surrounding areas: standard Adirondack soil with typical winter frost penetration and no unusual chemical signatures. Yet the snow directly above these specific spots behaved differently than snow anywhere else in the region. Media attention intensified as the story captured national interest. The combination of a missing child and an unexplained scientific phenomenon created compelling television coverage that brought reporters from major networks to Lake Placid. The unwanted publicity created additional challenges for the investigation, as genuine tips became mixed with attention-seeking false reports and conspiracy theories. The Chen family found themselves thrust into a spotlight they never wanted, their private tragedy becoming public entertainment for viewers who watched the nightly news coverage with morbid fascination. Susan, already devastated by her son's disappearance, struggled with the additional burden of media scrutiny and the constant pressure to provide statements and interviews when all she wanted was to search for Michael. David appointed himself as the family's spokesperson, handling media requests and coordination with law enforcement to protect Susan from additional stress. His background in logistics helped him manage the overwhelming flow of information, tips, and offers of assistance that poured in from across the country. But the constant activity also served as a way to avoid confronting the growing possibility that they might never find their son alive. Paranormal investigators and conspiracy theorists began arriving in Lake Placid, drawn by reports of the preserved footprints and the mysterious nature of Michael's disappearance. These self-appointed experts proposed theories ranging from alien abduction to government experiments, much to the disgust of law enforcement and the Chen family. Detective Flynn found himself constantly debunking ridiculous claims while trying to maintain focus on legitimate investigative leads. The resort management faced their own challenges as the case transformed Lake Placid from a peaceful vacation destination into the center of a media circus. Guests cancelled reservations, afraid to bring their own children to a place where a boy had vanished without explanation. Tom Bradley worked with law enforcement to balance the needs of the investigation with the resort's obligation to provide safe, enjoyable experiences for remaining guests. Local residents rallied around the Chen family and the investigation, but they also struggled with the transformation of their close-knit community into a place of national notoriety. Long-time Lake Placid residents had lived through the 1980 Winter Olympics and understood media attention, but this was different, darker and more invasive, focused on tragedy rather than celebration. As weeks passed without progress, the investigation expanded to examine similar cases throughout the region. Detective Flynn and his team researched missing person reports from the Adirondack region dating back decades, looking for patterns or connections that might provide insight into Michael's disappearance. What they discovered would eventually prove crucial to solving the case, though it would take years to understand its significance. The research revealed several other mysterious disappearances in the Lake Placid area over the previous 40 years. A 12-year-old girl named Emma Walsh had vanished in 1962 under circumstances remarkably similar to Michael's case. She had been playing with friends near the same resort property when she simply disappeared, leaving behind footprints in the snow that remained visible for months after her disappearance. Going back further, investigators found newspaper clippings from 1954 about a missing boy named Tommy Morrison, whose tracks in the snow had similarly defied explanation. The boy had been sledding with his family when he vanished, and his footprints remained preserved in the snow throughout the winter and well into the following spring, becoming a local curiosity before eventually being forgotten as the case grew cold. The pattern suggested something more than coincidence, but the similarities also raised more questions than they answered. Why did these disappearances occur at irregular intervals? What connected them besides their mysterious nature and the phenomenon of preserved footprints? And most importantly for the Chen family, what had happened to the missing children? Detective Flynn established a task force to investigate the historical cases alongside Michael's disappearance. The team included forensic specialists, local historians, and investigators from other jurisdictions where similar unexplained disappearances had occurred. Their work would eventually uncover connections that had been missed for decades, but progress was slow and often frustrating. Winter turned to spring, and still Michael's footprints remained. When the surrounding snow finally melted in late March, revealing brown earth and emerging spring vegetation, the tracks persisted in what appeared to be a patch of permanent snow that defied the warming temperatures. The phenomenon attracted scientists from universities across the Northeast, each offering theories but none able to provide definitive explanations. The preserved footprints became a pilgrimage site for the curious and the grieving, drawing visitors who came to witness the unexplained phenomenon and leave flowers or toys in Michael's memory. The Lake Placid Town Council erected a small fence around the area to protect it from souvenir hunters and vandals, but this only increased the site's notoriety and the steady stream of visitors it attracted. Susan Chen visited the footprints daily throughout that first spring and summer, often bringing fresh flowers or small toys that reminded her of Michael. She would stand at the fence for hours, talking quietly to her missing son as if he might somehow hear her across whatever distance separated them. Other parents began joining her, drawn by their own fears and the universal dread of losing a child. The case attracted the attention of federal investigators as theories about kidnapping and interstate crimes were explored. FBI agents interviewed resort guests and staff, examined travel patterns and vehicle registrations, and coordinated with law enforcement agencies across the country to investigate potential connections to other cases. But like every other avenue of investigation, federal involvement yielded no concrete results. As the first anniversary of Michael's disappearance approached, the Chen family faced the agonizing decision of whether to hold a memorial service or continue waiting for answers. The lack of closure made grieving impossible, leaving them suspended between hope and despair, unable to move forward but unwilling to give up. The psychological toll was evident in Susan's weight loss and David's increasing isolation from friends and extended family. The media returned to Lake Placid for anniversary coverage, bringing renewed attention to the case, but also fresh pain for Michael's parents. Television crews filmed the preserved footprints, now protected by their fence, and surrounded by memorial items left by strangers who had been touched by the story. The coverage generated new tips and theories, but also attracted more conspiracy theorists and curiosity seekers to the small mountain town. Detective Flynn used the anniversary publicity to make renewed appeals for information, hoping that someone who had remained silent might finally come forward with crucial details. He appeared on national television programs, carefully explaining the facts of the case while avoiding sensationalized speculation about the preserved footprints. His professional demeanor helped maintain focus on finding Michael, rather than exploiting the mysterious circumstances for entertainment value. The fourth part of our story begins 1 year after Michael's disappearance, as the investigation entered its most challenging phase, maintaining momentum and resources for a case that had yielded no significant progress despite exhaustive efforts. The preserved footprints continued to defy explanation, serving as both a memorial to Michael and a daily reminder of the mystery that had consumed the lives of everyone involved. Susan and David Chen made the painful decision to return to Brooklyn permanently after the first anniversary. The daily confrontation with the sight of their son's disappearance had become unbearable, and David's extended leave from the Atlantic Shipping Company was jeopardizing their financial security. The decision felt like abandonment, but staying in Lake Placid had become another form of torture that served no productive purpose. The move back to Brooklyn presented new challenges for the grieving parents. Their apartment, unchanged since the previous Christmas, contained reminders of Michael in every room. His bedroom with clothes still hanging in the closet, his favorite books on the shelves, and photographs documenting 8 years of a life cut tragically short. Well-meaning friends and neighbors offered support, but their questions about the investigation and their curiosity about the mysterious circumstances only added to the family's burden. David hired a private investigator, Robert Flynn, a different Robert Flynn from the state police detective, this one a former NYPD officer who specialized in missing children cases. Private investigator Flynn had worked on dozens of cold cases during his 25-year career with the New York Police Department, and his reputation for persistence and thoroughness made him the Chen family's best hope for continuing the search when official resources were necessarily redirected to more recent cases. Flynn traveled to Lake Placid monthly, maintaining relationships with local law enforcement and following up on tips that continued to arrive from around the country. His approach was methodical and patient, understanding that cold cases were solved through persistence rather than dramatic breakthroughs. He re-interviewed witnesses, examined evidence with fresh eyes, and maintained detailed files that documented every aspect of the investigation. The private investigator's work revealed inconsistencies and gaps in the original investigation that had been overlooked during the emergency response phase. Several resort guests who had been present during Michael's disappearance had left before being interviewed, and tracking them down required extensive detective work across multiple states. Most of these delayed interviews yielded nothing significant, but the thoroughness helped ensure that no potential lead was ignored. Meanwhile, the preserved footprints at Lake Placid continued to attract scientific interest and public attention. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Michael's family, a climatologist from Cornell University, established a research station near the site to study the meteorological conditions that might explain the phenomenon. Her work, funded by a National Science Foundation grant, represented the first serious scientific attempt to understand why Michael's tracks remained preserved, while all other snow in the area behaved normally. Dr. Chen's initial findings confirmed what investigators had already observed. The snow containing Michael's footprints remained at a consistently lower temperature than surrounding areas, despite identical exposure to sun, wind, and air temperature. Sophisticated instruments detected a temperature differential of approximately 10 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to maintain the snow in a stable state, while nearby areas melted and refroze with seasonal changes. The source of this temperature differential remained mysterious. Ground-penetrating radar revealed no unusual geological formations beneath the preserved tracks, and soil analysis showed no chemical compositions that might explain the cooling effect. The phenomenon appeared to violate basic principles of thermodynamics, creating a localized microclimate without any identifiable energy source or mechanism. The scientific research attracted additional investigators and theories, transforming Lake Placid into an unofficial laboratory for studying unexplained phenomena. Graduate students from universities across the Northeast arrived to conduct thesis research on various aspects of the case, from the meteorological anomalies to the psychological effects on the local community. The constant stream of researchers and curiosity seekers created an ongoing disruption to normal life in the small mountain town. Local business owners found themselves in the uncomfortable position of profiting from tragedy tourism, as visitors came specifically to see the preserved footprints and learn about Michael's disappearance. Hotels and restaurants benefited from the increased traffic, but many proprietors struggled with the ethical implications of earning money from a family's suffering. Some donated portions of their profits to search and rescue organizations or funds established to help other missing children cases. The Lake Placid resort, where Michael had disappeared, faced particular challenges in balancing respect for the tragedy with the need to continue operating as a vacation destination. Management worked with law enforcement to maintain the integrity of the investigation site while providing safe, enjoyable experiences for guests who came for legitimate recreational purposes. The resort also established a scholarship fund in Michael's name to support local children's winter sports programs. Detective Flynn, the state police investigator, remained personally involved in the case, even as his official responsibilities shifted to more recent investigations. He understood that families of missing children never truly heal until they have answers, and he made unofficial visits to Lake Placid whenever his schedule permitted. His dedication to the Chen family extended beyond professional obligation to personal commitment, reflecting the bond that develops between investigators and families who share the burden of unsolved cases. As the second anniversary approached, new developments began to emerge from the historical research into similar disappearances. A retired librarian named Margaret Foster, who had worked at the Lake Placid Public Library for 40 years, came forward with information about local legends and historical accounts that might be relevant to the investigation. Foster had been hesitant to share what she considered folklore, but the persistence of the phenomenon convinced her that even unlikely information might prove valuable. Foster revealed that Native American tribes who had historically inhabited the Lake Placid region had stories about cold places where the earth never warmed, even in summer. These locations were considered sacred or dangerous, places where tribal members avoided camping or hunting because animals and people sometimes disappeared without explanation. The oral traditions had been dismissed by European settlers as superstition, but Foster wondered if they might contain kernels of historical truth. Archaeological research confirmed that the area around the resort had indeed been avoided by indigenous peoples for centuries before European colonization. Excavations conducted with tribal permission revealed evidence of temporary camps and hunting sites throughout the region, but a notable absence of permanent settlements near the location where Michael's footprints remained preserved. The pattern suggested that native peoples had recognized something about this specific area that made it unsuitable for human habitation. Geological surveys commissioned by the state police revealed extensive networks of underground caves and limestone formations throughout the Adirondack region, including areas beneath the Lake Placid resort property. Many of these cave systems had been formed by water erosion over thousands of years, creating complex underground landscapes that remained largely unexplored and unmapped. The possibility that Michael might have fallen into a hidden cave system provided the first logical explanation for his disappearance, though it didn't explain the preserved footprints. Speleologists, cave exploration experts, were brought in to examine the underground possibilities. Their preliminary surveys, using ground-penetrating radar and seismic equipment, revealed several void spaces beneath the resort property, suggesting the presence of caves or underground chambers that might be accessible through concealed entrances. However, the rocky soil and dense tree roots made excavation difficult and potentially dangerous without more precise location data. The cave theory gained credibility when researchers discovered historical records of mining operations in the Lake Placid area during the late 1800s. Copper and iron ore had been extracted from several locations around Mirror Lake, leaving behind tunnels and shafts that had been abandoned when the mines became unprofitable. Many of these mining sites had been forgotten over the decades, their entrances concealed by vegetation and natural erosion. Property records and mining company documents revealed that the current resort property had indeed been the site of a small copper mining operation from 1887 to 1894. The Adirondack Copper Company had sunk several shafts and created underground tunnels before abandoning the site when ore deposits proved insufficient for profitable extraction. Maps from the mining operation showed tunnel networks that extended beneath what later became the Sledding Hill and surrounding areas. The discovery of historical mining activity provided a potential explanation for both Michael's disappearance and the preserved footprints. If mining tunnels created underground spaces with different temperature and air circulation patterns, they might create the microclimate necessary to preserve snow in specific locations. More importantly, if tunnel entrances had been concealed or partially collapsed over the decades, they could create hidden hazards that might trap unwary children. Armed with historical maps and modern detection equipment, investigators began the painstaking process of locating and examining potential tunnel entrances around the resort property. The work required careful coordination between archaeologists, engineers, and safety experts to ensure that exploration didn't create additional hazards or damage important evidence. Each potential site had to be thoroughly documented and safely investigated before moving to the next location. The fifth part of our story takes us to the breakthrough that would finally provide answers, though not in the way anyone had expected. The discovery came not from high-tech investigation or scientific research, but from renovation work at the Lake Placid resort that uncovered evidence hidden for decades beneath the building that had housed so many family vacations. In the spring of 2004, nearly 19 years after Michael's disappearance, the resort underwent major renovations to modernize its facilities and expand its dining capacity. The work required extensive excavation around the foundation of the main lodge, including the basement areas that had housed storage rooms and utility equipment since the building's construction in the 1920s. What the construction crew discovered would transform the investigation and finally provide the answers the Chen family had sought for nearly 2 decades. Workers excavating near the basement's north wall encountered an unexpected void space behind what appeared to be a solid foundation. Further investigation revealed that a section of the basement wall was actually a facade covering a much older stone foundation that predated the resort's construction. Behind this false wall lay a forgotten room that contained items apparently stored there during the resort's early years and then sealed up during subsequent renovations. The hidden room measured approximately 12 feet by 15 feet, with stone walls that showed evidence of much older construction than the rest of the building. The space contained old furniture, documents, and personal belongings that appeared to span several decades, suggesting it had been used for storage by multiple owners before being walled off and forgotten. Among these items was a collection of photographs and documents that would prove crucial to understanding Michael's disappearance and the mysterious phenomena that had surrounded it. Resort management immediately contacted local authorities about the discovery, understanding that any hidden spaces might be relevant to ongoing investigations. Sheriff Santos, now in her final years before retirement, arrived personally to examine the find. Her decades of experience with the Michael Chen case made her uniquely qualified to assess whether this discovery might provide new leads in the investigation that had defined much of her career. Among the photographs discovered in the sealed room was a collection dating back to the 1940s, documenting the resort's history and various guests over the years. Most were typical vacation photographs, families posing by the lake, children playing in the snow, groups gathered around the main lodge's fireplace, but one photograph, dated December 1947, would prove to be the key that unlocked the mystery that had puzzled investigators for nearly 2 decades. The black and white photograph showed a group of children playing in the snow near the same sledding hill where Michael had disappeared 38 years later. The image captured a moment of winter joy. Children in heavy coats and knit hats racing down the slope on wooden toboggans similar to those still used by the resort. But what captured Sheriff Santos's attention were the footprints visible in the background, small tracks leading from the sledding area toward the tree line, with the same unnatural clarity she had observed in Michael's case. Further examination of the photograph under magnification revealed additional details that sent chills through the investigating team. Near the edge of the image, barely visible among the pine trees, was a small figure wearing what appeared to be winter clothing from an earlier era. The figure was positioned near the exact spot where Michael's tracks had ended, and the photograph's perspective suggested a child standing in the same location where searchers had found no trace of the missing boy. The discovery prompted an intensive review of the resort's historical records and archives. Property deeds, guest registrations, and business documents were examined for any mention of missing children or unusual incidents that might have been forgotten or deliberately concealed. The research revealed a pattern of disappearances that stretched back to the resort's earliest years, though many had been dismissed as runaways or accidents rather than mysterious vanishings. A newspaper clipping from 1947, discovered among the documents in the sealed room, reported the disappearance of 7-year-old Billy Morrison during a family vacation at Lake Placid. The boy had been playing near the sledding hill when he vanished, leaving behind footprints in the snow that remained visible for months. The article described the phenomenon as a curious natural occurrence and noted that local residents had reported similar incidents in previous years. Additional research revealed that the Morrison family had been guests at the resort during the same week that the photograph was taken. Billy Morrison matched the description of the figure visible in the background of the image, suggesting that the photograph might have captured the moment of his disappearance or shortly thereafter. The implications were staggering. If the photograph truly showed Billy Morrison after his reported disappearance, it suggested that missing children might not have vanished as completely as investigators had assumed. The discovery of the historical photograph and supporting documents prompted a complete reassessment of the investigation. If multiple children had disappeared under similar circumstances over several decades, the case represented a pattern of incidents rather than isolated tragedies. More importantly, the evidence suggested that some missing children might still be present in the area in ways that previous searches had failed to detect. Ground-penetrating radar surveys were expanded to cover the entire resort property and surrounding areas, this time focusing specifically on locations mentioned in the historical documents and visible in the old photographs. The surveys revealed an extensive network of underground voids and passages that had been previously undetected, including spaces directly beneath the area where Michael's footprints had been preserved. Cave exploration experts equipped with modern technology began systematic exploration of the underground network, discovering passages that extended far beyond the known mining tunnels. Some passages appeared to be natural cave formations, while others showed evidence of human modification for mining or other purposes. The complexity of the underground system suggested that it might conceal spaces large enough to hide missing children, either by accident or design. The breakthrough came when explorers discovered a large underground chamber, approximately 30 feet beneath the oak tree where Michael's scent trail had ended. The chamber was accessible through a concealed entrance that had been partially collapsed for decades, creating an opening just large enough for a small child to fall through, but too narrow for adult rescue attempts without extensive excavation. Inside the chamber, exploration teams made the discovery that would finally answer the questions that had tormented the Chen family for 19 years. The underground space contained evidence of multiple human presences over several decades: clothing, personal items, and unfortunately human remains that appeared to represent several individuals of different ages and from different time periods. The remains were carefully excavated and transported to forensic laboratories for identification. DNA analysis, dental records, and carbon dating would eventually confirm what investigators had begun to suspect. The underground chamber had been claiming victims for decades, creating a hidden tragedy beneath the cheerful vacation destination above. Among the remains discovered in the chamber were those that DNA testing would confirm belonged to Michael Chen, finally providing the closure his family had sought for nearly 2 decades. Additional remains were identified as belonging to Billy Morrison from 1947, Emma Walsh from 1962, and several other children whose disappearances had been documented in historical records but never explained. The discovery revealed that the preserved footprints phenomenon had a logical explanation rooted in the unique geological conditions created by the underground cave system. Cold air rising from the depths created a microclimate that maintained snow at temperatures below the surrounding environment, preserving impressions made by children who had unknowingly walked over the concealed entrance to the chamber below. The investigation revealed that children who had stepped on the weakened ground above the cave entrance had fallen through into the chamber below, where they had become trapped without possibility of escape or rescue. The tragic irony was that their footprints remained perfectly preserved above, marking the exact location where they had disappeared, while searchers looked everywhere except directly beneath their feet. The 6th and final part of our story brings closure to a mystery that had haunted Lake Placid for decades, while also providing the scientific explanation for phenomena that had seemed supernatural. The resolution of Michael Chen's case represents both triumph and tragedy, the triumph of persistent investigation and the tragedy of lives lost to a hidden danger that had claimed victims for nearly 60 years. Susan Chen, now 63 and living alone in Queens after David's death from cancer in 2001, received the news of her son's discovery with a mixture of relief and renewed grief. The phone call from Sheriff Santos came on a Tuesday morning in October 2004, nearly 19 years after Michael had vanished from the sledding hill. The certainty of his death was devastating, but it also ended nearly 2 decades of uncertainty that had made healing impossible. The funeral for Michael Chen was held at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan, drawing hundreds of mourners who had followed his case over the years. The service included children from his former elementary school, now adults with families of their own, who remembered the energetic boy who had sat beside them in second grade. Susan chose to bury Michael's remains in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, near where his father David had been interred 3 years earlier, finally reuniting the family that had been torn apart by tragedy. The other families affected by the decades-long mystery also found closure, though for some it came too late to comfort family members who had died without ever learning their children's fate. Emma Walsh's parents had both passed away in the 1980s, never knowing that their daughter's remains lay beneath the resort where they had returned annually for years, hoping for news. Billy Morrison's younger sister, now in her 70s, was able to attend his funeral and finally say goodbye to the brother she had lost as a child. The scientific investigation into the preserved footprints phenomenon provided definitive answers to questions that had baffled researchers for years. Dr. Sarah Chen's meteorological studies, combined with the geological surveys conducted after the cave discovery, revealed how the underground chamber created the unique conditions necessary to preserve snow indefinitely. The cave system acted as a natural refrigeration unit, with cold air from the depths rising through small fissures in the rock to create localized temperature variations at the surface. The specific area where children's footprints had been preserved sat directly above the main chamber, where the temperature differential was most pronounced. This explained why Michael's tracks had remained visible, while all other impressions in the surrounding snow had degraded normally. The preserved footprints finally faded after the cave entrance was properly sealed, and the underground air circulation patterns were disrupted. When the spring thaw came in 2005, the snow containing Michael's last steps melted away like normal snow, bringing an end to the mysterious phenomenon that had marked the site for nearly 2 decades. The loss of this unusual feature was noted by many visitors who had made pilgrimages to see the inexplicable tracks. But for Susan Chen, it represented a kind of peace. Her son could finally rest without his last moments being displayed as a curiosity. The Lake Placid resort implemented comprehensive safety measures to prevent future tragedies, working with geological engineers to identify and seal all potential cave entrances on the property. Ground-penetrating radar surveys became standard practice for resort properties throughout the Adirondack region, ensuring that other hidden dangers would be discovered before they could claim additional victims. The resort also established a memorial garden in Michael's honor, featuring a playground where children could play safely while their families enjoyed the mountain setting. Sheriff Santos, who retired in 2005, shortly after the case's resolution, considered the Michael Chen investigation the defining challenge of her career. Her persistence in maintaining the case as an active investigation, despite years without progress, had ultimately led to the discovery that solved not just Michael's disappearance, but a pattern of tragedies that had puzzled the region for decades. She established a training program for rural law enforcement agencies on investigating missing person cases in areas with complex geological features. Detective Robert Flynn, the state police investigator who had worked the case from its early days, co-authored a technical paper on the investigation that became required reading at police academies throughout the Northeast. The case demonstrated the importance of maintaining detailed records, pursuing seemingly impossible leads, and never accepting that some mysteries cannot be solved. Flynn's methodical approach and willingness to consider unconventional explanations had been crucial to eventually understanding the true nature of Michael's disappearance. The private investigator Robert Flynn, hired by the Chen family, donated his files on the case to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to help other families facing similar tragedies. His work demonstrated how private investigators could supplement official investigations by maintaining focus on individual cases, even when law enforcement resources were necessarily divided among multiple priorities. The Chen case became a model for family-funded investigations that enhanced rather than competed with official efforts. The scientific community benefited from the extensive research conducted at Lake Placid, with the meteorological and geological studies contributing to understanding of how underground features affect surface conditions. Dr. Sarah Chen's work on microclimate formation became the foundation for research into other unexplained weather phenomena, while the cave exploration techniques developed during the investigation advanced the field of underground rescue operations. The media coverage of the case's resolution focused on the scientific explanations rather than sensationalizing the tragic aspects, helping to educate the public about how seemingly supernatural phenomena often have rational explanations waiting to be discovered. The case became a teaching example in journalism schools about responsible reporting on missing children cases and the importance of focusing on facts rather than speculation. Lake Placid itself gradually returned to its identity as a peaceful vacation destination, though the Michael Chen case remained part of local history. The town council established a missing persons memorial in the village center, honoring not just Michael and the other children who had disappeared at the resort, but all missing persons whose cases remained unsolved. The memorial served as a reminder of the importance of community vigilance and support for families facing such tragedies. Susan Chen continued to visit Lake Placid annually on the anniversary of Michael's disappearance, but her visits became pilgrimages of remembrance rather than desperate searches for answers. She established a scholarship fund at the local elementary school to support children's winter sports programs, ensuring that Michael's memory would be associated with the joy he had found in winter activities rather than just the tragedy of his death. The case influenced changes in resort safety protocols throughout the region, with property owners required to conduct geological surveys and post warnings about potential underground hazards. The New York State Department of Health established guidelines for recreational facilities built in areas with known cave systems or historical mining activity, preventing future tragedies through improved awareness and safety measures. The Chen family's story became part of the broader conversation about missing children and the importance of never giving up hope while also accepting the need for closure. Susan's grace in the face of unimaginable loss inspired other families dealing with similar tragedies, while her advocacy for improved search and rescue resources helped save other children who might have been lost to different dangers. The underground chamber where Michael and the other children had been found was sealed permanently after the forensic investigation concluded, ensuring that no future victims would be claimed by the hidden danger. A small marker was placed near the oak tree where the footprints had ended, noting simply that it marked a place where children had been lost and found, where questions had been answered, and where healing could finally begin. The story of Michael Chen and the footprints that never melted became a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of scientific investigation, and the way that even the most mysterious circumstances can eventually be understood through patient effort and careful analysis. It reminded everyone involved that behind every missing person case is a family seeking answers, a community affected by loss, and the possibility that truth can emerge even from the deepest mysteries. In the end, Michael's case was solved not by dramatic breakthroughs or supernatural intervention, but by the methodical work of investigators who refused to accept that some questions cannot be answered. The preserved footprints that had seemed so mysterious were revealed to be evidence of natural processes working in unusual ways, while Michael's disappearance was explained by a hidden danger that had been claiming victims for decades before anyone recognized the pattern. The resolution brought peace to Susan Chen and closure to a community that had been haunted by unanswered questions for nearly 2 decades. Most importantly, it ensured that the hidden danger beneath Lake Placid could never again claim young lives, transforming a site of tragedy into a place where families could once again create happy memories without fear of inexplicable loss.